Leon, you've met Andy Stanley, haven't you?
I have.
Did you like him?
Yeah, I did actually.
So not only have you met him, he's been to your church.
He has. He's been to our church, twice.
And sat in your office.
He has, him and Sandra. In fact, I made sure that all my bookcase reflected his work and put all of his books at eye level.
Did you really?
Which Sandra thought was hysterical. But yeah, I did. No, he's a really nice guy. Really nice guy. I think when you meet some of these guys that, lead such massive organisations, they can be a little intimidating, but a lot of that is in your own mind. He was a really nice guy. And he to come to our little church in Halzone, just outside Birmingham, and just like poured out from his cup. Do you know what I mean? To the people that were there and to us. He was brilliant. Him and Sandra, amazing.
So far be it from me to disagree with the great man. But I sat, it must have been 10, 15 years ago, I sat at his church in Atlanta, and he was teaching leaders, and he said, there are 6 questions every leader should ask themselves. And so I kind of leant forward with my pad, ready to write these down. So I want to go through those 6 questions with us together. I'll ask you what those questions are and see what you have to say about it. I'd be really interested. Do we disagree with him? Are they the right questions? Should there be some other questions that we should ask? So I think that would be a good place to start. In fact, I wrote it down here on my notes. He said, when it comes to being a great leader, the questions you ask are as important as the answers you give. Yeah. Why do you think he said that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you go into leadership, you think you go into leadership to find the answers. Yeah. And I think you think sometimes the pressure on a leader is to have all the answers.
Well, people come to you for answers.
That's right. They come to you. And you're in rooms where you think everyone's looking for me for an answer, really. But I think questions are way more important than answers. And they call it the Socratic method. Socrates was the great person that went around, who knew a lot, but actually he went around discipling and teaching other people, not by telling them what he knew, but by asking great questions. And Jesus was the master.
I can't remember.
As well.
I can't remember the stats on that, but is it like he answered 3 out of about 200 questions
something
that were
like
asked?
That, yeah.
Because when you asked Jesus a question, he would ask a question,
another question,
which must have been so frustrating.
Really annoying.
It's great.
Yeah.
But see, again, Andy went on to say, look, if you want, just before he asked these questions, he said you shouldn't judge a leader by the answers that they give, but by the questions that they ask.
Yeah.
And when I think about it, the great leaders I've spent time with, it's because they're interested in me. Yeah. The first place they start isn't to tell me stuff, it's to ask me stuff. Yeah. You respect them so much more, don't you?
You do.
Right, let's dive right in. Question number 1. Andy said that the first question leaders should be asking is, what gauges should we be watching? What gauges should we, I guess really if you've got the wrong measure of health for your church, then you're going to make the wrong plan in order to grow. So you need a right measure of how healthy you're doing, how you're winning. Do you have gauges at church that help you to know whether you're winning at Lifecentral or not?
Yeah, we do. I think the first thing is actually the importance of looking at gauges and looking at measurements. Even that, for some leaders, church leaders, that can be an alien concept.
The idea of getting good data.
Yeah, exactly. Almost thinking, well, that's why would we do that? We're here to love people, we're here to help, people understand the Bible, to live better, blah, blah, blah. But I think everything in life, like you don't drive a car and don't look at the gauges. Because if you don't look at the gauges, you're going to be in trouble. Very soon you're going to be empty. Or, your
not enough oil
is going to be blown up. So I think the most, for me, the start of the whole process is I want to look at gauges, but I want to look at the right gauges. And I think, like you say, like you play a match of sport, there's a scoreboard. Yeah. So you know whether you're winning or not. Yeah. You know whether you're behind, you know whether you're ahead. You know where you are in the game, really, in that sense. And I think that's important in leadership.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because back years ago, I've been involved in church ministry for 30 years. I know you have as well. Yeah. We basically had the ABC. We had 3 gauges. We measured attendance, we measured buildings, and we measured cash. That's what we measured. They were the things. I mean, is that still valid? Are they the things that we should be measuring, or are there other gauges?
I think they're important. I mean, we measure those things. They're important. I think we've got a broader understanding. They're kind of like not superficial, but quite surface measurements, which are important because they tell a story. But I think there are other gauges which are much more important as well. And I think for me, it's not either or, it's both and. So I think for us at Life Central, we want to measure. We want to measure stuff like engagement. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So if you measure numbers, that's a static measurement. Yeah. But if you measure engagement, you're measuring how many steps, the kind of steps that people are taking in their spiritual journey, all of that kind of stuff. So I think there are a multiplicity of gauges. I think you as a church leader need to figure out what your mission is, and then what gauges best reflect whether you're winning or not, and how you're doing on that mission, really. I
had a friend who was a real lovey. He was an actor. Okay. He was great. He was really good. But I used to say to him, how do you know, it's the same kind of leadership question, how do you know when you're doing well as an actor? Yeah. And I remember he just turned to me and he went, bums on seats, laddie, bums on seats. Because that's all they measured. Have we filled the house? Yeah. Is there a crowd? Yeah. And I guess as church leaders, if our mission is more about transformation and about life change, then a big Sunday crowd doesn't necessarily mean life change is kind of happening. So what are the kind of, let's get specific here, what are the 2 or 3 gauges that you as a leader would measure at Life Central? What should we be watching?
Yes, so for us, engagement is massive. So again, so
what is engagement?
We try to think steps, not programs. So where are people taking steps? Okay. And again, you've got to define what those steps mean. So when somebody takes a step to say get involved in serving, that's engagement, and that's about health. It's also about growth. So we know there are 462 people currently, as of today, who are in our what we call dream team that are serving some aspects. Again, that's a number, so we measure the number, but we're also measuring the steps. So regularly what we will talk about is we'll encourage our team, volunteers and staff, to tell good news stories. The good news stories always used to be stories of growth, but now we're saying let's tell some stories of health as well. Okay. So where have you seen someone take a step? Where have you seen someone grow in their relationship with God?
So what you're saying is you're not necessarily celebrating 460 odd people serving.
That's right.
You're celebrating the steps
that they've taken.
Okay.
Exactly. So for instance, we're really growing as a multicultural church. That's really important to us. Right. So whenever we see someone of colour taking a step of engagement into a team which was white before, that's incredibly important, because that's not just growth, that's health, and that's our mission. Do you know what I mean? To be multicultural in our expression of who we are as a church.
Listening to Andy give this talk and him talk about gauges, he talked about 4 gauges that they kind of use. I'd just love to get your take on it. They talk about, if Leon Evans joined North Point Community Church, is he serving? Yeah. Is he in a group? Yeah. Is he giving financially into the life of the church? Yeah. And is he inviting his friends? Yeah. They're kind of 4 big gauges they use. And it's almost like they don't have membership. You decide whether you're a member or not by saying, I'm in a group. I love this place and the mission of this place so much. I'm prepared to be in a small group because that's where life change happens for best. Yeah. I want to invite my friends to it. And in fact, I've tried 2 or 3 times this year to invite people to different events kind of thing. I give financially from my income. And I've found a place to serve. I've discovered what my gifts are. I've found a place to serve. Yeah. Do those kind of gauges?
I think those are great gauges, as well as I think there are others. Not beneath that, but at a different level of looking at.
But they're a good high level.
But they're great high level ones. I mean, we measure baptisms. That's massively important for us. Our mission is helping people find and follow Jesus. We measure baptisms, but what we're trying to measure much more and celebrate is invitation. So how do we know that people are inviting people? Because the reality is, and we try to celebrate them whether the people have come or not. Sometimes you can celebrate the people that come to an event or that get baptized, but actually health is when people are inviting. Yeah. And a lot of this work is the work of the Holy Spirit, the work of God. It's not our work anyway. Yeah. But if our people are inviting, when I first came to the church, people weren't inviting people on a Sunday because Sundays were for Christians. Yeah. So over the years, we've tried to really shift that. So now we really celebrate when people have invited. And if we hear stories of people that have invited people, even if they haven't attended, they've taken that step of engagement, and they're in the mission of inviting. And the more and more people that invite, the more and more people come, and the more and more baptism stories. So you end up celebrating all of those gauges, but it's not just the top end one, the surface one that you see, the baptisms or the numbers or the people bums on seats, but actually the process of that journey as well. I think that's important.
And it's beholden on us to partner with our people to provide something that's so engaging. Your people are desperate to invite their friends.
What have you learned about that? Because because when you encourage your people to invite people, but like I know you've said this a lot, but if we don't give them anything, I mean, what kind of things can we give them to help that?
So it's a great question. I took a friend of mine called Alex who just joined our staff at church. I took him out to North Point. This must have been 15 years ago or so. Alex hadn't been a Christian long, hadn't been on our staff long, never invited his friends to church. I took him out. I took him out to North Point. At the end of the service, we walked out into the lobby, and he said, "Duncan, I don't understand it." He said, "If I lived here, I would be running from this place to my work colleagues. I'd be phoning them up, my friends at home, near where I live, my family who don't go to church. I'd be saying, you have to come next week and sit with me. This is amazing." So I think we have a responsibility to provide something on a Sunday morning that's insider, that's outsider friendly, if you know what I mean. That uses the kind of language that if I invite my friends, they're not going to be weirded out. So that's a number one. But also, I do get fed up with church leaders who say, invite your friends. And I want to say, help me. Give me a social media post that I can share. Give me an email template that I can push out to my my book. Give me a flyer. I just want a couple of those that I can leave with people when I'm visiting them. Just give me something it makes the job of me inviting a lot easier. Don't just tell me to invite. Help me to invite.
We've discovered something really simple on that we were doing flyers. Now we do little business cards, like for teaching series or for an event. And actually they're much easier because I have them in my gym bag. And when I'm in the gym, that's way easier when I'm chatting to somebody just to say, oh, and I've done that many times. Whereas if I get a flyer out, it can feel a little bit like, oh, okay, here's the flyer person. And flyers just end up on the floor or in the bin. But you give them a little card, and they're actually cheaper than flyers to produce. They're really cheap. So we're just doing a series in March, on miracles actually, which is a really interesting subject to do in a skeptical world. But again, we're producing these little cards saying miracles. We're calling it Wonderstruck, miracles in the skeptical world. We'd love you to join us. And again, if you're in conversations, it's empowering to people then,
And if you wanted to take it a step further, on those cards to have a QR code. So if someone's hooked enough to read the card and go, do you know what? I could do with a miracle right now. I've lost my job. My wife's walked out on me. I've got a bad report from the doctor. I could do with a miracle right now. And to click on a QR code and there's a 60-second, 90-second introduction from you or someone that says, hey, thanks for clicking on the code. I would love to see it. In fact, I'd love to talk to you personally if you come to church.
And that helps that person that's got that card in their hand, that they're actually part of that missional experience and journey. It's not just about inviting them to come to listen to us, do you know what I mean? But actually right there in the gym or wherever they are, they're actually part of that journey as well. I think the other thing with measuring that I'd say, and we're trying to learn this at the moment, I read a book last year which was so good called The Gap and the Gain. It's not necessarily a Christian book, or the guy who wrote it does have faith. It's called The Gap and the Gain, and he talks about how you often measure things in your life from the ideal of where you want to be. So you start where you are and you're measuring to the ideal of where you want to be, and he calls that the gap. Says the problem is if you only ever measure in the gap, you're only ever frustrated. You're discouraged. So like you say at the start of the year, I want to lose 20 pounds, right? But you've only lost 7. Well, that's because you're measuring in the gap. Whereas the gain is from where I was to where I am now. I've actually lost 7 pounds. Do you know what I mean? And I think you can apply that. And I know in church life, I'm a little bit of because I'm a futuristic person like you, always thinking about where you want to be and the ideal. If you only ever measure in the gap, it's quite discouraging.
It's so hard as a leader.
It is, but we're trying to shift that language a little bit. And we're early into this, but saying let's measure the gain, as well as aspiring to the gap of where we want to be.
It's almost like celebrating the gain.
That's right.
Being conscious of the gap. That's right. Because as a leader, so if I gave you £1 million to do ministry,
would you?
If I, mate, if I had £1 million, next year Leon would be millionaire.
Yeah, that's right.
Honestly, if I had £1 million and I gave it to you to do ministry, I bet you would come up with some dreams about how you could spend that, and the cost would be about £1.5 million.
It would.
Because you're a
always
futurist.
$500,000 short.
I know, you are. Because we're future thinkers. And there's always going to be that gap between our vision and our resources. And in a sense, that's kind of healthy, isn't it? So that gap is a healthy gap, because if you haven't got enough vision if your resources are always hitting that target. But in terms of celebrating the gains,
that's
like,
right.
Wow, we've got $1 million, rather than saying, we're 500 grand short.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah, when we felt God really say about, look, you're a very white church and your area is not. What was it look like to go on a journey of becoming a multicultural church? Yeah. The gap was always huge. Yeah. Nobody on our stage, everyone on our stage was white. All of our leaders were white. All of our, do you know what I mean? Yeah. You're always in the gap. Now we're measuring in the gain, and all of a sudden the stage isn't all white. Our leaders aren't all white. Our people, and it's changing, and that's brilliant. And we're looking at where we were and where we are now. We've still got a gap, and that's good. But actually, we're trying to measure the gain as well as the gap, and I think that's important.
This is going a little bit down a cul-de-sac, isn't it? But we've had this conversation before. Whoever you stage is who you attract.
That's right.
And
that's right.
You and I are getting older.
That's right.
We're around that 60 age
group, age thing as well.
And if we're white 60-ish guys, we're going to attract.
So you're 60-ish, I'm not.
You're way behind. You're at least 18 months behind me. I know. But you know what I mean? We're going to attract people our age. And so unless people see themselves on stage.
And there are interesting gauges there as well. Age, that's another gauge. Age gauge, that's another gauge that we use is age. So what's the average age in this ministry, in this area, in this team?
Is it getting older?
Exactly, because that's another gauge that I think leaders don't keep their eye on. Yeah. And what happens is that quicker than you think, everything gets older and older and older with you. Yeah. And that's a really important gauge.
So you could say that there are at least 4 basic gauges of serving, giving, being in a group, and inviting.
Yeah. Yeah.
That if you're not measuring anything, that's a great place to start.
Standards.
They're foundational ones. Rather than how many bums on seats, laddie.
Yes.
So they're good gauges to start with. But then there are other gauges that will help us go even further. And data's important. And I say this all the time when I talk to leaders. Data is really important. It shouldn't make a decision for you, but it should inform. It should inform your next few steps.
Absolutely.
Because data is really important. And oftentimes we instinctively want to make a decision, but the data is saying, maybe that's not the best decision.
And I think you even if you look at the Bible, there's a book called the Book of Numbers for a reason. On the day of Pentecost, 3,000 people were added to the church. Somebody counted them. You get the Jethro and Moses thing where he was talking about the way you're doing this isn't great. You've got all these people. You need to structure differently. The data inform the decision as well. And I think sometimes as leaders, we miss that. Because we think data is modern and businessy and corporate. Actually, it's ultimately it's all about people. And I think that's the thing as well. With all of these gauges, the central thing that drives us is the mission God has given us, and the mission is always people.
Yes.
So what is God doing in people?
Yes.
And I think that's that's really important.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. I think about how Jesus often said, the church and leaders were often afraid of business, or we're dismissive of business. And Jesus said, "I'm about my Father's business." And when he said, "Okay, my mission is that important," let me tell you the strategic plan.
That's right.
We're starting here in Jerusalem, and then we're, in the city. Then we're moving out to the county, if you like. We're moving out to Judea, and then we'll take this thing global.
Yes.
Then we'll be a multinational business, but we're starting around the corner from where we live, and there's this concentric strategic plan.
That's right.
That works.
Right.
So maybe we shouldn't. So let's sum this question up. Give Andy a mark. Is he right to include gauges?
He absolutely is. Yeah. You can't celebrate and you can't recalibrate if you don't have gauges. Yeah. And you drift. Yeah. And the only thing you need to do to drift is nothing. Yeah. Because if we do nothing, we will just naturally drift. So I think that scoreboard, those gauges, whatever they are, help you celebrate, help you recalibrate, help you to stay on track.
It's motivational to know whether you're winning or not.
It really is.
And if you don't know you win, the thing is, if you're not clear on what your win is, everybody makes up their own win.
Yes.
And that's when chaos comes.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Let's move on. Question two. This was a question that when Andy asked it, I thought, that's an interesting phrase. Maybe it's an American phrase, not a phrase. And it took me a moment to dig down in it. But he asked the question, where are we manufacturing energy?
Yeah.
And I remember him asking, and I thought, do you know what? The number of times I stand on the stage at church and I try and hype up people to do something that I'm never going to do myself. You need to come to this thing next Friday.
You're not going to.
I'm not, I wouldn't be seen dead at that thing. So he asked the question, where are we manufacturing energy? And it made me realise there's a big difference between buzz and hype.
Yeah,
so buzz is kind of like this groundswell of it's almost like things are bubbling up. Yeah. There's an excitement, there's an expectation. That's healthy. And then hype is this thing where we're trying to sell something to other people who are not really interested.
Yeah.
So maybe a good way to know whether we're manufacturing energy or not is to ask the question, what are we doing that's not really working?
Yeah.
What have we got the courage and the confidence as a leader to say, what are we spending money on? What are we spending time and resources on that really isn't working? What have we fallen out of love with that we used to think was really important, but it's less important now? And I think that question is really important because it exposes the kind of dead areas in church. And it gives us a chance to either improve them because they're dying or kill them off because they're irrelevant, But whatever we do, we can't ignore them. So you would say that is an important question. Why would you think Andy would include that on a list?
Yeah, I think it's funny because we've talked about the phrase manufacturing energy, as whether we understand that. Because I think for me, I can't remember who, I think it might have been Peter Drucker, somebody famous said once, the first task of leadership is to define reality. And I think sometimes we're frightened of that as leaders, because of our insecurity or because of our theology or whatever. But actually, the first task of leadership is to define reality. And to say this isn't working is a brave decision, but it's a correct one. And I think the problem is for us as church leaders as well, we get emotionally attached to lots of methods. And Andy famously says, which I know we love this phrase, we marry the mission, but we date the model, or we date the method, we date the approach. In other words, we've married to the mission, that never changes. Nothing changes, but the way we do it has to change and must change and should change. So I think manufacturing energy is when you get to that point where you think, actually, we're trying to make this happen, we're trying to keep this going, and it's kind of past its sell-by date, really. And not that it was bad. And Andy, I don't know whether you remember that Andy does this brilliant illustration, and I've used this as well, about an old couch. I think they call it settee, and it's like, for him and his wife, this is so important, they got memories here and all that kind of stuff, and but actually then the kids come along, or even the grandkids, and say, we're not keeping that old thing, are we? Not that it was bad, it was amazing, but it's an old couch. And he was saying there are things in church and in leadership that are like these old couches that serve their purpose really well, but for a new generation coming along or trying to seek and find God, actually, this is an old couch and it needs to be ditched.
But I'm in love with it.
I know, I've got all these memories attached to it and all of that kind of stuff. We've watched movies on there, we've cuddled on there, not me and you, but and I think it's trying to say, okay, has this become an old couch?
The question, this is the question that you can use, can't you, in your leadership team, which is a dangerous question to ask, but could be quite informing. Can you imagine sitting in your team and saying, is there anywhere in our church where we feel we're losing steam right now?
Yes.
That's a reality. That's Max DePrey was the guy who said define reality.
And it's like,
where are we losing steam? Where did we used to have that energy? Where did we used to fall in love with the couch, but we're less in love with it now?
That's right.
Just to be honest about those kind of things. I can remember one church leader talking about how when they were a small church, he did all the weddings. And then he grew to be quite a large church. And he realised, goodness gracious me, every Saturday now I'm out doing weddings. So they made the decision as an eldership team, as a leadership team, that he wouldn't do weddings anymore. No more weddings, because it was chaotic for him. And I can remember him saying, the problem with that is the week after I agreed that, one of the elders who was in the discussion as well came to me and said, my daughter's just got engaged. You will marry her, won't you? And it's like, they're courageous decisions to make. Again, I remember talking to one church leader who they funded quite a lot of counselling in their church. And then they realised they put a lot of energy and time and reporting and budget towards this thing. The better thing to do is just to signpost somebody. They lost a bit of energy. Initially it was great, but it was just something that kind of kept reoccurring. We could still give people professional counselling by pointing them in a direction of some brilliant people out
probably
there.
Better.
And probably better.
Probably serve them better. I think as a leader, you can have unconditional love, but you can't have unconditional time.
That's good.
And I think the best thing we give our people isn't actually our time, it's our energy. But if we're being sucked into a whole load of other things, then because we don't have unconditional time, that's going to affect our energy, and then we end up manufacturing energy. I think for us, one of the best things to happen to us, and I know this was a terrible thing globally, and it was, in lots of ways, was COVID. Because when COVID came along, there were some things that we were doing as a church that were manufacturing energy, that weren't being that fruitful, that that people were emotionally attached to but weren't core to our mission, they stopped over COVID, and they haven't started again. You know, and I think the problem is, you know, it gave us an external reason to do that. A better leadership value and attribute is to have the courage to do that
while the sun is shining.
Make that decision. Do it well. Do it graciously. Do it kindly to people, but do it because it matters. You know, because the more we manufacture energy in stuff that is draining us or taking us away from the mission, the less energy we've got to the mission and to the people that we're trying to reach.
I was coming down on the train to meet you to have this conversation with you, and I thought, you know, if you did ask that question in your leadership team, where are you losing steam? Where's momentum drifting? What would be, if someone said to me, well, what's your plan to get momentum back again? I thought of this 4-point plan. Can I share it with you? Because I think it's really good. 4-point plan. First off, find out what is working in church, where there is a lot of momentum, and throw a bucket of petrol over it. You know, any business would do that. That department's killing it. Give it more people, give it more budget, because that's crushing it, you know. So find out what is it in church that's like, do you know, suddenly we've doubled in size in our kid meet. Why don't we spend more money with our kids and young people and that kind of stuff? Find out what's working. The second thing is drastically cut what's not working. Don't just talk about it. Honestly, go ahead and say, this isn't working anymore. We've got to make. That's a courageous decision. You've got to do it properly. You don't just overnight, but you know, cut the whole thing out. The third thing is, Andy often talks about, and I remember him saying this as part of this presentation he did on the 6 questions. The third thing is, he talks about new creating momentum. So he says, you know, when you go into the supermarket, you don't just, there's not just the choice of one toothpaste. There's a million. There's ones with green stripes and blue stripes, and ones that whiten your teeth, and ones that get rid of plaque. Because if you bring out Colgate toothpaste, it's going to lose momentum. So you've got to bring out Colgate Blue and Colgate Fresh and Colgate for kids and Colgate for aging teeth and all the rest of it. And so what are we doing that's new, that's fresh? How do we refresh the couch? Maybe the couch, we don't need to throw it out. We need to take the covers off and put new covers on. So I love that idea. And I think the other way of building momentum is to make sure as a leader and as a church, we're leaning into our sweet spot. I used to play, so I know you and me, we talk about football all the time. Football was my number one game, but I used to play quite a bit of cricket when I was at school. Have you ever played cricket?
Not really, no.
Have you know a cricket?
I know it, and I watched it a little bit, but I was never really.
So you know a cricket bat? It has they call it the centre of the bat, don't they? And sometimes when the bowler bowls and you don't get the ball in the centre of the bat, it vibrates all up your hands and you drop it. But if you get the ball in the sweet spot in the centre of the bat, you don't have to give any effort. It pings off to the boundary, 4 runs, like really fast. And we're all created with this sweet spot. You as a leader, you have a sweet spot that I don't have, and vice versa. And you as a leader, I'm going to get more momentum out of you if you're doing the things that are part of your sweet spot. And I wonder if we could think about that with all of our leadership teams. You know, are we all operating in our sweet spot? Because that's going to create energy. That's going to create momentum. And are we as a church doing let's not copy what the church down the road does. Because that's their sweet spot. Our sweet spot is this. So my 4-point plan is find out what's working, chuck petrol on it. Drastically cut what isn't, because why would you waste time on stuff that isn't working? Think about new. Maybe recovering the couch. Because new creates momentum. And then make sure you and your leaders are leading into your sweet spot. Does that work?
It really does. And I think I've some examples. I mean, the way we were doing baptisms, for instance, we were doing them a certain way. We got attached to doing them a certain way. But actually, we looked at pruning that and looked at doing that differently. So not having baptisms, but doing them differently. Since we've made some adjustments in the way that we do it that work for us, our baptisms have gone through the roof. You know, because the structure, the way we were doing it before, was restricting that. And we were waiting for people to come to us, whereas now we're taking the front foot and we're doing them a bit more strategically, and actually we're baptizing more people in the last 2 years than we ever have before. You know, and that's growing. And I think even things like prayer, I mean, there's no church I know that doesn't say we don't pray enough. And you know, so we know prayer is important, you know, but for us, just saying let's pray let's pray, or let's have a prayer meeting. We've got to do it differently. So we do now a monthly prayer day where sometimes we do it online, we resource people, we say, hey, at 1 o'clock, wherever you are, we'd love to pray this prayer together. Let's be one at one. And just trying to find different ways to refresh and bring new to the toothpaste analogy that you use, rather than just keep calling it prayer, let's have a prayer meeting. Actually, the goal isn't to have a prayer meeting. The goal is to pray. The goal is to be a praying church. So how do you do that? So I think it's thinking about things like that.
So good. So I love that. Let's be one at one.
Yeah, just that
Where did you get that from?
Just came to us. But it's asking the questions, like what we're saying, really, rather than having the answers. Asking the questions. Yeah. We know prayer is important. We know we need to do it differently. Yeah. How can we encourage people to do it differently? And I think the most important thing for me, this question links back to the first question.
Gauges. Exactly.
When you're manufacturing energy, when you know what your gauges are. Yeah. If you don't know what your gauges are, you don't know that you're manufacturing energy or not. Yeah. So I think those two questions I think are connected as well.
Can I get? No one's going to listen to this. So that's fine. So can I get really personal, really honest with you before we move on to question 3?
Okay.
Where are you manufacturing energy?
Where am I personally?
Or church? Where do you feel you've lost
the church? That's a great question. Do you know here's one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment, which I'm really pleased we are, is in our youth and kids ministry. On the surface, if you look at the on the surface gauges, they're really good and they're better than they've ever been. But we're all as a team thinking, the kind of bell curve thing where the people say that here's the thing and it's growing and growing. When it comes up here, it drops down. And this is where most people look at change. You should look at change on the way up of the curve, not on the way down. So we're up on the curve and we're looking at it and saying, it's great, but there are some issues. Yeah. Like our youth ministry's gone really wide, but we've lost a little bit of the deep. Okay. The kids ministry's gone deep, but we've lost a bit of the wide. So it's like... and it's on the way up. It's not on the way down. But if we don't catch it now and restructure now, then it will be on the way down. Yeah. And it's really hard. You're manufacturing energy when everything's coming down. You're trying to reinvent it. Whereas if you've got some energy and momentum, if you can make some shifts and changes, then I think you're not manufacturing energy.
And that's the skill of a leader to spot the moment. Yeah. When you need to make change. Why are we changing? It's successful. Yes. We've got better numbers than we've ever had. Yeah. We're really great. Yeah. Why are you shaking this up? And that management of change as you start a new bell curve so you continue to grow, not just up and down and up and down.
And with that, it's not me, it's our next gen guys, because I'm saying from a bit of a distance, it looks great to me. They're saying, no, it's not. And they're giving me that. And I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't see that. But they're seeing it. I think as we've created a culture of continual improvement, of looking at the gauges, of not doing things that don't work, and so I think they're coming and saying we need to restructure, otherwise we are going to be manufacturing energy here if we have this current structure.
So it sounds like you would agree with Andy. That should be one of the 6 questions.
Yes.
Where are we lacking momentum trying to...
And like you say, it comes down to you personally as well, in your own personal leadership. Am I manufacturing energy? Because if I do not have unconditional energy.
Yes.
I can have unconditional love, I can't have unconditional time, I certainly can't have unconditional energy.
Especially at your age, Leon.
Especially at my age. Thank you very much.
Question 3 from Andy. And if I'm honest... this is a painful one for leaders. Yeah, such an important one. But when he said it, in fact, I remember there were some audible gasps in the room. There were people with, because as a leader, you think this is on me, and it's probably the hardest thing that I'm going to have to do. But he said this: who needs to be sitting at the table? Yeah. Who needs to be sitting at the table? Good decisions. Require good input. So who needs to be sitting around the table? What input do I need to make the best decision possible? Because when you have that, you can cut through the red tape. You can ignore the org chart, if you like, and go straight. So he talks about sometimes, he has his management team, but if there's an issue they're looking at, he goes deep into the organisation, 2 or 3 low levels below, and said, "Can you just for a season or for a meeting come to our management team, because your input into this is going to be golden for us." So who should sit around the table? I mean, why do you think Andy would include this?
I think that's really bright and as a leader, isn't it? I think Andy always says he's not the most intelligent, smart person in the room. No, he's got an incredible gift of leadership.
He's pretty smart,
but he often says that, doesn't he?
He does.
And I think that's security. And it's also a sense of, hey, the mission's bigger than us, really. Yeah. We did something recently. In fact, it wasn't me. It was one of our other guys that in our guest services, which we call like our hosting and welcoming space, we were okay, but we wanted to grow in that whole area. Yeah. We've got someone in our church that's amazing in the restaurant business. She's been a manager at Jamie Oliver's and Bill's and other restaurants, and she's so brilliant at this. So we got her to come in and do some training for our Sunday morning team who goes, and she was brilliant. Yeah. Just little tips.
And she's not on your management team.
She's not in the org chart. She's not, in that sense, but she's so brilliant and so infectious. And I've been to her restaurant many times where she's been a manager, and you're treated amazingly, and you want to go back. Do get a discount. But that's another issue. But, and the fact that we brought her in, our guys brought her in, I think that's really great. Yes. Because she's got, and there's so many people in all of our churches who've got so much experience in their world, and they want to serve Jesus with it as well. They are doing that in restaurant. I mean, she's brought more people to church than anybody. I mean, she's amazing. But there are so many people who've got skills and experience. And I mean, when it comes to looking at buildings and finance and HR and systems, there's people out there, that's what they do for a living. But often in church, we don't allow them a seat at the table. Because they're not staff, or they're not elders, or they're not, whatever. Or they're too busy maybe to be around a lot. But I think let's draw them in.
For a season.
And for a task and for a project, because I think that's amazing. Get the right people around the table, really help your decision making.
I think the key you just said there is the right people around the table, isn't it? Because why, if you're wanting to come up with new ideas, why would you have completer finishers, as it were, around the table? Because the minute you sprout an idea, they start saying, but how much is it going to cost? And how are the elders going to agree with this? Who's going to do that? And it's like, no, we're still on the ideas. Whereas if you want to get stuff over the line, don't have people like me around the table, because I'm going, we could do that better. What about this? What about that? I'm such the frustrating person in the room. When that happens, leadership's about making good decisions, and good decisions require really good input. One of the things Andy said was, leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. I mean, how profound is that?
That's really good. It's really good, isn't it? Yeah. I think one of the tensions with this that we have, and again, these things are all interconnected. Andy's genius, because these questions are all interconnected. Do you mean they're like a domino effect, really? And because we're often manufacturing energy, because we don't know whether we're winning or not, we don't have time then. We think we don't have time to create spaces for the right people at the table. So it's easy just to do it with the ones that you know. And I think that's an issue. So recently we came to a thing where we thought actually our social media was getting a little bit tired. We were in fact our staff guys are brilliant, but that's not their background. They're more graphic design and that kind of stuff. But we've got some younger people in the church who are amazing at it. It's what they do for a living. And again, we've just flexed the way that we approach that to include them. And that means evening meetings, it means Zoom, it means whatever. But again, creating a different environment where they now are taking the lead on stuff, and our social media's gone like that really since. And again, if you're manufacturing too much energy, you almost haven't got the bandwidth to look at doing it differently and bringing people around the table.
Why do you think leaders are afraid to get others to break the org chart and to get others around the table, to have other voices inputting? Do you think it's because they think it's going to create more work, or?
Could be. I'm not sure really, because I love that. For me personally, if I know there's anybody in the church that's got a skill, I'm all over that. But I mean, maybe it's security. Maybe it is a sense of I'm the one paid for it, so I ought to be doing it. Whereas actually, you're not the one paid for it. You're the one released to enable it to happen, and that invariably is going to be through others and not through you. But it could be. I wonder if it is because we are sometimes so busy doing other things that we shouldn't be doing.
Or because we're all control freaks.
Or we could be control freaks. It could be as simple as that.
Well, if you're getting a bunch of young people in to do the social media, I don't know, what's going to happen to this? Exactly. Do you know, I was thinking about this as well. I was thinking, because it's not just about getting any people around the table, it's getting the right people around the table.
That's right.
Was it Jim Collins that talked about the right people
on the bus?
In the right seats.
Yes. Yeah.
He says he gets so frustrated when he goes into businesses and you say, what's your biggest asset? And they go, people are our biggest asset. And he always says, no, they're not. The right people are your biggest asset. So how do you know someone's the right person to be around the table? I remember, again, listening to a guy called James Emery White. This must have been 20 years ago. James Emery White answering that question, how do you know you've got the right people on your team, whether it's for a project or whether it's longer term? and he talked about the 5 C's.
Yeah.
So if I wanted you on my team, I need to talk about these 5 C's.
Yeah.
I need to know that you're competent.
Yes.
If I'm asking you to do a project for us on architectural design, so you've got an ability to do that. So are you competent? But the second thing is, what's your character like?
Yeah.
You might be highly competent, but goodness gracious me, you drop bombs wherever you go. And you're going to be a nightmare to work with.
Yeah.
And the third C he talks about, which is so good, he talks about chemistry.
Yeah.
Because you might be highly competent. You might be the person with the biggest integrity I've ever met. For whatever reason, it just doesn't, I don't know, I don't like being in your presence. It clashes a bit, I always call it the telephone test. Because I do, if Leon Evans pops up on my phone, it's like, oh, wow, Leon, you pick it up. But there are other people whose names I won't mention. When they come on my screen, you go, oh, And so chemistry is that sense of, who is it when they call? You go, yeah, I want to have a conversation. But then he dropped in these other 2 C's, which are quite good. He talked about calling.
Yeah.
It is actually, vocationally, a passion of yours. Do you feel called to do this?
Yeah.
I can remember interviewing somebody for a job in graphic design in our church. And we sat down for the interview, and I can picture his face now. He said, I said, why do you want to do this job? He said, He said, really, it's just a stepping stone. My passion is medical photography. That's where I want to get to, medical photography. This is just a stepping stone to get there. I thought, let's finish the interview now. I want somebody who's passionate about growing a church that reaches unchurched people, not someone who's just stepping onto something else.
Not a lot of space for medical photography.
There's not a lot. There's a few interesting subjects he could take photos of, but... So calling was important. And the last one, which I thought was great, he talked about catalyst. Are they catalytic?
Okay,
Do they make stuff happen?
I didn't know what the 5th C was. I was waiting to see what that 5th one was. That's a good one.
Do they make stuff happen?
That's really
good. Do they
good.
sit in meetings and just expect everyone else to do it? Or do they say, I'll own that. Give that to me. And there are people I work with, most of the team I work with at Further Faster are catalytic. They want to grab an idea and they'll come back to me taking the idea from a 5 to an 8 to a 9 and it's brilliant. I love it. So those, I think those 5 C's
because
really
another C could be consultant. The problem with that, consultants are great, but actually you don't want someone just to consult, you want someone to catalyse. And that's very, good. Very different, isn't it? That's good. I like that. That's really good.
So I'm really glad Andy asked the question, who should be sitting at the table? Because I think our tables are too closed. We should be used to having an empty seat that gets filled by various people for various projects.
And you get more buy-in then from people.
Exactly.
People, when they weigh in, they buy in. And I've always experienced, leading the same church for 30 odd years, actually people don't need to have their way, but they want to have their way considered. And when you open the table up and you ask them what they think and you ask them to bring their skill and their competency and their character to the conversation, actually, even if you don't run with everything they say, they're more bought in, because you've given them that opportunity to buy in. So that's really good.
Question 4. When Andy asked this question, I'd never thought about this ever before, and I never thought it would be a leader's responsibility to ask this question. But he said every leader, one of the 6 questions a leader should ask, and I'd be interested to know whether you think Andy's right or wrong about this, and whether you've ever done it. Andy said that a question that should be asked about the team that you've got around you is, who's not keeping up? You should ask yourself that, who's not keeping up? It's always a tough question. But there's somebody that could always do with promoting into their gift elsewhere or transitioning to somewhere else or finding a new role and doing that with a sense of dignity. So why would you say that this is an important question for a leader?
T.D. Jakes says, release them to their destiny.
I love
such a, do you know what I mean?
Promote them into their gift.
Yeah, that's right, I think it's an important question. The only thing I'd caveat with it is that in my experience, sometimes we can ask that question, who's not keeping up? We can come up with an answer. Another question is, in what way have I actually contributed to them not keeping up? In other words, have I made the expectations clear? Have I given them the resources they've needed? Have I given them, or we given them the coaching that they deserve?
And you probably got them on the team in the first place.
That's right.
You saw something in it.
That's right.
It's your job.
That's right.
If they're not keeping up, it's not their fault.
It's easy as a leader to say it's their issue. I think one of the big mind shifts I think a leader needs to do, and I think Craig Rochelle taught us this years and years ago, we often say our people won't, and then we fill in the blank. But actually, that's a faulty paradigm. We haven't led our people to and fill in the blank. So in other words, if this person isn't keeping up, I can say, well, so-and-so's not keeping up. Or I can say, have I led them? in such a way that they're keeping up. Now, that means being clear about expectations, providing the adequate resources, the coaching, etc., time frames, right gauges, etc. At the end of all that process, if they're not keeping up, that's a whole different conversation. But I think before we get to that one, I think it's easy to say they're not keeping up. What's harder to say is, have I helped them?
The problem
have I empowered them?
Have I empowered them? The problem is if the team's running at 100 miles an hour and there's one person who's running at 50 miles an hour, what tends to happen, deep frustration sets in with the 100 mile an hour people looking at this other girl or other guy that's just not cutting it. They feel guilty because they can't run at that kind of a level. But actually, I think it was Hybels who once said that the team runs at the speed of its slowest member. And there's a lot of truth in that. So if you have a 50 mile an hour person, they're slowing the team down. They're slowing progress down. So I think it is a really important question to ask. But I want to, again, no one's listening to this, so we're fine. It's just you and me having a chat. But you ever had to do this? You ever looked and thought, this person's not keeping up? And be practical. How'd you go about doing it?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes because the person, again, going back to all of your C's, if it's a competency issue, not a character or anything, maybe they're in the wrong space.
Yeah.
You mean, we would talk about football, this player's great, but they're not a left back.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? You're playing them out of position.
Yeah, they're right.
And actually, that's not kind.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I think we mistake in church is what kindness is. For me, clarity is kindness.
Yeah.
And actually to say, hey, you're so great, you get the mission of the church, you're hardworking, your character, but you're just not a left back.
Yes.
You need to be centre midfield. Yes. Do you know what I mean? Just using that analogy.
Yeah.
So I think that's one route, and we've done that where we've adjusted people, and said, hey, I think this it's a little bit like David, and David and Goliath, and they put Saul's armour on him. Yeah. It's like, it doesn't fit me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? He's always going to fail. So actually finding the right space for someone, I think, is really important.
We had to do that with a youth pastor.
Did you?
He was employed to lead 30 or 40 teenagers in the church, and he was different class. He was fantastic.
Yes.
Then the church went multi-site.
Yes.
And we said to him, actually now, we don't need you to lead kids, we need you to build teams over 3 locations to lead kids. He floundered.
Yeah,
because he said, I just want to hang out with kids. That's my passion.
And that's the clarity piece.
It's clarity and reassigning.
And there's kindness in that. I think the way you do that's really important, because for me, it has to be about the person, not just about the mission. Yeah. The mission's important, but again, we have to be careful that we don't ride over people for the sake of the mission, because the mission is people, but the mission is so important. We have to be careful that we don't just let the one affect the many.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So we have to deal with the one with kindness and with grace and with love, but we have to deal with it.
We have to deal with it.
We have to deal with it
because that mission's so important.
Right. That's right.
Do you know, I did for this. The last question, I said I got this little 4-point plan together. If you're lacking momentum, I did the same for this.
Okay.
Do you want to hear my 4-point plan?
Go for it.
See what you think about this. 4-point plan for dealing with a team member who's going at 50 miles an hour and everyone else is going 100 miles. Number 1. Act fast.
Yeah.
The danger is we let this go on for months, if not years. Yeah. And so for years and years, there's this disconnect between these people. And the thing is, oftentimes, the worst thing, I've seen this happen before, where a leader says, I'll wait for their annual performance review.
Yeah, no, don't do that.
That's just a disaster. Because all you do is say, why didn't you? You say, give me some examples. And they say, well, back in January. And you go, that was 9 months ago. Why didn't you tell me? So act fast. If you see it, act fast. Secondly, picking up on your point, absolutely right, check yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe you haven't been clear about the expectations. Maybe you haven't been clear about the role you want them to perform.
What the win is.
What the win is.
Go back to the gauges.
It's not them. Yeah. It's my fault.
Yeah.
And thirdly is, again, going up to what you said, I've put is cheer them on. Act fast, check yourself, cheer them on. You hired them, now you need to support them.
Yeah.
So maybe they need a bit of extra training. Yeah. Maybe they need more clarity in their role. Maybe they need clearer expectations. Yeah. Maybe you need to reward where you see improvement in them if they get it, if they're humble enough to get it, and you've got to start rewarding that kind of thing, because what gets rewarded gets repeated.
Yeah.
And again, to pick up your point, the fourth thing is maybe you need to reassign or refocus.
Yeah.
So you're not chucking them out.
Yes.
There's just a reassigning or a refocusing of their role. But, Leon, a time comes when it's just not working and you have to say goodbye. How do you as a leader, if someone's not keeping up and you've gone through all of those steps, you've looked at yourself, you've tried to refocus them, you try to reward when they're performing well, and I know because I've known you for 30 plus years. I know you've had to say goodbye to some people. How do you do that?
It's hard. It's really hard because I think in our context in church, yes, there's an organisational dynamic. Yes, there's a missional dynamic, but there's a people dynamic here as well. We're a relationship. We use the words biblically. It's a family. There's a business, the kingdom business, but there's that dynamic to it as well. And when you know people and you know them and you know their family and you love them, when it isn't working and you've tried all you can and they've tried all they can, then that's really hard. I think clarity is absolutely important. I just before I answer that though, I'd go back to some of the mistakes we've made that we are realising now is that sometimes when you take someone on, especially in a staff situation, but it's true of volunteers as well, because we're not clear enough early on, we let it go too far, and then we get frustrated because they're not doing what we haven't actually been clear about in the first place. And so I think when you take someone on, you can assume, we've hired someone to do X, Y, and Z, they'll just crack on and do it, which maybe they did in their previous place, but not in your place in the way that you want to do it. So actually, I think we're learning that we need to be more prescriptive early on for someone. And then release out a little bit more. But when you've done all of that,
being prescriptive early on, really clear.
I think if you look at the Jesus model, that's exactly what he did. He said, "I'm going to do it. You're going to watch." The classic stuff. Then we're going to do it together. Then you're going to do it, and I'm going to watch, and then you're going to do it. But he didn't come in at step one. You're just going to do it. But that's what we do often. Well, you're hired to do the kids. Just go on and sort the kids out. And then 2 years later, we're frustrated because they're not doing it the way we want them to do it. But we haven't been clear. But I think when you've done everything and it doesn't work, it's just really hard. It's just really hard. I think we've just got to be clear. We've got to try and find a way. I mean, without trying to be over spiritual, we've had some situations in the last few years where actually we thought we don't know how to. There's an issue here. It's a fit thing. It's a whatever. We don't know how to resolve it. And we've literally prayed. And God has made a way, and that can happen, and that can happen. But when that doesn't happen, you have to initiate it. Do you know what I mean? And you have to initiate it. And I think that means being clear, being kind, being generous.
But you have to initiate it.
You have to initiate
because the mission is so important.
That's right. That's right.
And if this is slowing the mission down, everyone spends eternity somewhere. And if you're in inactivity in this and you're letting it drift for so long, it's not working. People's eternities are
and I think your example of the youth scenario, that's true of every scenario in a church, that somebody can lead an area of ministry at that level or size or scope, and then they can't make that leap and that adjustment, and that's really hard. But if they can't, then you not dealing with it is not only affecting them, it's going to affect all those others that you're now not going to reach because that person can't make that transition. And so but I think being as kind as you can, being as generous as you can financially, and I mean that has happened, and for some of us, it's gone well, and we're all friends. And others, it hasn't gone so well.
It's always going to be.
It's always going to be hard.
It's never going to be sweetness and light.
No, it's not. It's not.
I think Andy asking this question, it's a risky question to ask. But correct me if I'm wrong, Leon. Leadership demands courage. Every leader has to be courageous because they're putting their head above the pulpit, above the parapet, and they're standing up and saying, "I'll take responsibility for this." And I love that. So I heard somebody say recently, I thought, I never thought about that. Leadership is about taking responsibility. Responsibility is the ability to respond.
Yes, that's good.
Isn't it good? So there's someone who's not keeping up. What's your ability like to respond to the situation? Because it's so important. And it's a risky question to ask who's not keeping up in our team, but we have to respond to that. And it takes courage.
It does.
Are you prepared as a leader to have that kind of courageous thought that says we have to, there's a million things I have to do. I haven't been clear. It's me, not them. Start there. And then try and work that through. And if it doesn't work, you've got to have the courage to say, for the sake of the mission, for the sake of the team, this isn't working.
And I think team's really important because sometimes in these kind of scenarios you're talking about, you as a leader are too close. So it's hard to be objective sometimes because you're emotionally invested and in your to actually have the objectivity of some other voices, some other mirrors to look into. So for me, it's like our eldership, our leadership team, who are a little bit more distant from that. They're a voice there really, where I say, look, this is the scenario that I see. Give me some understanding, give me some views on this really, because I think otherwise you can be a little skewed, and they can bring some clarity because they're not so emotionally connected to it. And I think that's really important as well.
I like that. Question 5. I was quite surprised that Andy added this as a question. Initially, I thought to myself, I'm not so sure I would include that. And then the more I've dug into it, the more I've thought, it's pretty pivotal, actually. It's pretty important. He asks the question, where do I make the greatest contribution?
Yeah.
Every leader should ask themselves, where do I make the greatest contribution?
Yeah.
And the reason he says it's important to ask this is that we're often tempted as leaders to do everything.
Yeah.
We go to a conference, we read a book, we see a video clip, we listen to Duncan and Leon whittering away, and we think, there's a million things I've got to do now, and my job description gets bigger, my to-do list gets longer, and we're tempted to do everything. And when we think that's true about us, we have to do everything. Generally, that leads to failure.
Yeah.
And so we need to ask ourselves, take a 30,000 view and say, where do I add the greatest value?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I think about it, how am I wired in such a way that when I do that thing that I'm wired to do, it adds the most value to the organisation? And then resist the temptation to get involved. I mean, of course, the chairs need to be put out sometimes and we all muck in. Yeah. But if I'm wired to do this and I'm doing that constantly, if 60, 70, 80% of my time is doing stuff I'm not wired to do. So I guess another way of asking this question, just to make Andy's question maybe a little bit clearer, is how do you do what only you can do and delegate the rest?
Yeah, it's a great question, isn't it? I think, like you just alluded to, there are things that need to be done that you have to do, whether it's your sweet spot or not, whether it's your greatest contribution or not. I think the issue is what percentage of your time is that? Because if, like you just said, if 60, 70, 80% of your time is taken up with stuff that's not your sweet spot, that's not what you have to do, but then you're going to get burnt out and you're going to get discouraged. And I think it's that percentage of time. I think it's also a bit situational. Depends on how long you've been there. It depends on the size of the organisation. It depends on the other team around you. I think you have to create a culture where you can recognise and affirm in each other where you make your greatest contribution. Do you know what I mean? And actually give permission. So I know some of our guys, and we know, hey, this guy, Andy, this is his greatest contribution, and we acknowledge that and affirm that. Try and give him permission to lean into that more. And I think that's important as well, that you're not just on your own in a silo, but you're creating a culture within your team where you're recognizing and affirming the gifts that people have, and then trying to say, but you're not operating that much, are you? Do you know what I mean? How can we help? That kind of conversation is tricky. It's really true. And I think getting from where you are to where you want to be is a process. But I think acknowledging it and again, for me, it's like, am I aware of where I make the greatest contribution? And I can think it, but actually others are going to confirm that as well. So I was
talking to a staff member of a church recently, and they said, I really want to preach. I really want to stand up on stage and preach, and I never get the opportunity. And I just simply said to them, before I answer that, let me ask you a question. I said, when you're sat around in staff meetings and stuff comes up, what's the stuff that comes up that they always say, we need to give it to him because he's really good at that? What is that stuff?
No, that's good. That's
and they said, it's all about finishing. It's all about getting stuff over the line. It's all about event management, really. Doing stuff. That's what they always. He's brilliant at that. Get him to do that. So I said, does anybody ever say, when there's a need for someone to stand on a stage and communicate, does anyone ever say, we need to get him to do this? He said, no, never had that. I said, you need to listen to that, man.
Yes,
they don't see that in you.
That's right.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm getting at, really. That's the mirror. You've got to look into the right mirrors, have the right voices, where other people see it in different ways.
So you said something earlier on, which it's kind of like blew my mind a bit. You said you got about 460 people on your dream team, 460 people soon. That's 2 or 3 times bigger than a lot of people lead churches that they lead. I mean, you must be pushing close to 1,000 people who are part of your church. So what do you say to a leader who says, that's fine for you, Leon, you have a staff and 400 volunteers. It's me and my spouse, and there's about 30 people on a Sunday morning. You're saying that I only do what I can do and delegate the rest? There's not many people to delegate it to.
I know. My heart goes out, but we were there. We haven't always been where we are now, so it's grown into that. And I think there's like I say, there's a situational need where you're just doing what needs to be done. And I don't ever want to be a leader that gets to a place where I'm above that. So I will still put the odd chair out here and there, but if I'm going to spend a lot of my time putting the chairs out,
it's always in the wrong place, so someone has to.
Well, exactly. They're just going to correct what I've done. Make it. Yeah, they do that. He's
put that chair there again. Move it.
Why don't you go to your office and look at the books? Look at the Bible, because you're making a complete mess of this. But I think so. I'm never above that. And I think that's important that your people know that you're a servant. But I'm ultimately going to serve the church the best by being in the sweet spot of who I am to add the most value to the church, really. And I think it's a case, if you are in a smaller situation, just trying to be aware of that, getting to know yourself, and then trying to look out for people that can do some of what you don't need to do. And I think that's the thing. And if you don't start releasing it out, it's never going to change.
No,
it's never going to change. You've got to start somewhere.
1994, me and 6 friends started a church from scratch. Over a 9-year period. We grew it to 250 people. But we started with 6 people around Dave and Louis' kitchen table in a place called Bicester near Banbury in Oxfordshire. Just 6 of us, and we grew the thing. And I did virtually everything. They couldn't afford to pay me full time. They only paid me a couple of days a week. And as we grew I gave more of my time to it until I was working full time. But I found myself, as the thing started to grow, rather than doing 1 or 2 things really well that I was wired to do, I was doing 10 things, but doing them all averagely. Everything I did was average.
So when did you make the shift? So as you grew that, what was can you remember back to like the first delegate?
I can.
Okay, what did that look like?
So I did 3 things.
Okay.
I did 3 things. I made a list.
Okay.
I made an ask. And I made an exit.
That's good.
Right? I made a list, and I thought, hang on a minute, every Sunday morning, we'd grown to about 50 or 60 people by then. Every Sunday morning, I'm the first to arrive with 50 or 60 coffee cups. And I brought all the coffee cups in. I'm the last to leave because I had to wait until everyone had finished their coffee. I had to wash them all up, get them back in the box, put them in the boot of my car, and put them back in my garage at home. And I thought, that was a turning point for me. So I stood up on Sunday and said, I need somebody to help with coffee cups, because I can't do the coffee cups anymore. So if no one steps forward, we won't have any coffee.
Okay.
So nobody stepped forward. So I said it again the following Sunday and said, if no one comes and says to me, we're not going to have any coffee next week. Next week, I didn't bring the coffee cups and there was no coffee. And I had about 15 people lining up saying, no coffee, I'll bring the coffee cups in, that's easy. So I made an ask of people. And I think one of the ways in which you can make an ask of people is that the thing that we do often in church is we say, hey, Leon, could you help us out? And you go, yeah, all right. And you think, brilliant, here's the box. Go ahead and do it. You're in. And you think, well, blimey, I've not been trained. What am I supposed to do? When do I show up? What does success look like? And so we started this thing at our church that we called Taste and See. So I'd say to you, Leon, can you come with me next week and just shadow me? I'd love you to see what I do, because I think you could do what I do, and I think you could do it even better. I'd love you to see what I don't see. Let's have a conversation. Come the week after as well. And maybe you'll say, I think I could do this. Or maybe you'll see some stuff that I haven't seen, but just dip your toe in. Just taste and see and see whether it's good for you or not. And Taste and See became the first serve for us. So I made a list of things that needed to be done, like coffee cups. I made an ask of people, and I used Taste and See to do it. And then I didn't micromanage. I made an exit. I stepped out. I stepped out of the coffee cups to such an extent that we didn't have any coffee. So I made an exit, and I discovered actually that the less I did, the more I accomplished. It's mad, isn't it? But the less I did, the greater stuff we got done.
Why do you think leaders don't do that? Why do leaders keep doing the coffee cup things? Is it fear? Is it embarrassment? Or I don't know. What do you think it is?
It's because they pay my wages, and I need to prove to them. I need to prove to them that my wages are worth paying. I've got to show them that I don't just work on a Sunday. That I'm, I mean, bless them, they're busy people. I need to, and I kind of fell into that trap. I'm the leader here.
Yeah.
And also I just want to demonstrate that I'm a servant.
Yeah. Yeah.
I might be on the stage preaching, but I'm also bringing the coffee cups, putting the chairs out, those kind of things. And actually, that's a wrong view of leadership.
Yeah.
It's not getting stuff done; it's getting stuff done through others.
Yeah.
Is the hallmark of a.
Yeah.
Again, asking yourself, where do I add the most value?
Yeah.
Is a very interesting exercise.
Yeah.
You think about it in your church at the moment. What is it that when Leon Evans puts his hand to it, he adds the most value?
Yeah.
And then if you've got 2 or 3 answers to that, maybe it's strategic thinking, maybe it's series creation, vision casting. Maybe it's those things. So you think, right, it's those 3 things. Now go and ask your staff, ask your elders, ask volunteers. What is it that I do that you think adds most value? And if those 3 things come up, you're on the right track.
That's right.
But if, like my friend, it's 3 completely different things.
Yes.
You've got some.
That's really good. That's those mirrors. And I think when you've got those 3 things, however many things it is, then you have to go on that journey, don't you, of protecting those.
Yeah.
And then there are other things we all inevitably have to do. But how then do I go on that journey to find people that can do some of those other things? I'm releasing them into what they should be doing so that I then can do.
And also, you're giving them a chance to shine.
That's right.
If I'm hogging all the roles.
That's right. Yeah.
I can remember people at my last church who they said to me, I would never do what you do. My payoff, my buzz is just helping.
Yeah.
It's carrying stuff in. It's setting stuff up. It's taking it out at the end. I get a payoff from that. And I can't understand that because I don't get a payoff. But for them, that's what they love. And so I think there's something about, giving people a chance to shine that allows them to use the gifts that God's given them. Yeah. One of the quotes, I think Andy's right in including this question, where do I make the greatest contribution? And one of his quotes, just to finish this off, I think it's great, I made a note of it. He says, don't strive to be a well-rounded leader. He says, instead, discover your zone and stay there, then delegate everything else. That's what, not well-rounded. I put the coffee cups out. I do the Discover your zone. Discover your wheelhouse. Discover your lane. And run in that. And everything else needs delegating. It really does. I love that. Yeah. So you would agree with me? It's a good question to have.
Yeah. It's hard to get there. It's one of the hardest, I think, to get there from where you are. But again, measure the gain, not the gap. Try it. Do what you did. Write down those things, write that list, and then look for people and begin. Just begin. Just by little things. But if you don't begin, because it's such a big, you just end up defeating yourself. And you end up staying as you are, trying to do everything. Nobody wins.
Nobody wins.
No.
Andy's last question, the 6th question, was a total game changer for me. It must have been 10 or so years ago I heard him say this. Total game changer for the way that I work. Because his sixth question was, what should I stop doing? And I thought to myself, man, that's interesting because I've got one just next to me. I make to-do lists. I don't make stop doing lists. But as a leader, what are the things that I'm doing? And it kind of fits into the one we've just talked about our where I add the greatest value. But what are the things I should stop doing, or what are the things we as a church should stop doing? Why do you think that would have made Andy's list?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a distinction there, isn't it, between what should I stop doing individually, what should we stop doing as a church? But I think there's the same kind of principles. Again, maybe connected back to some of the questions, where are we manufacturing energy? Are we looking at the right gauges? Again, because we're doing things here that aren't contributing to the mission or that are manufacturing energy. So have we got the courage to stop doing those, whether it's individual or corporate as well? And I think that can be ministries. It can be the way that we're doing things as well. Activities. It can.
It's
be
a problem, isn't it? Because especially in church life, in leadership life, you see so many opportunities often. We could do that. That would be great. I've been to a conference and they're doing this. I've seen what Leon's church is doing. We could do this. I've read this book. Opportunity doesn't mean obligation. Again, I can remember being at a conference and they were spitting out brilliant, helpful, practical stuff. We were filling sheets of paper in. I came away with loads of notes. And the final thing that the host said was, the wise leader does now. The wise leader doesn't get in their car, drive home, and say to themselves, right, we need to implement all this stuff now. The wise leader says, what is God asking us to do? What's the one thing that we could change that might change everything? and opportunity to do so many things doesn't mean you're obligated to do those things. This stop doing list idea, I've been fascinated by Jim Collins. You know, he wrote Good to Great. And Collins talks about how he writes books that take him 6 or 7 years to write because he's a researcher. All his books aren't ideas. They're hard data-driven things. So he goes into companies and organizations, looks at the data and writes the books out of the data. It's so powerful. And in Good to Great, he tells the story about how he talks about things that we should stop doing that don't allow us to get to where we want to get to. And he talks about, it's great, he talks about how he decided as a leader on January the 1st, he wanted this year to read 52 books. Wow. So that's like a book a week he wanted to read. And 52 books is a lot. And he said, I got to the end of January and I realised I'd got through half a book, because he said I had War and Peace in one hand and I had the TV guide in the other hand, and the TV guide always won out. So he said, right at that moment, he said, I'm not going to get to my mission. I'm not going to achieve my goals. So he called his brother and he said to his brother, you know that 85-inch flat screen TV in my lounge? And his brother said, yeah. He said, I want you to come round right now, unplug it, take it away, and even if I beg you, don't ever bring it back. So his brother came right round, took the TV away, and he made that, and he said, I got to the end of the year and I hit my goal. So, but what was brilliant is he said at the end of that, he looked at the audience and he said, what TVs do you need to unplug?
Yeah, that's good.
You know, in order to get to where you want to get to, what TVs do you need to unplug? In other words, what's on your stop doing list, so you can be more effective in doing the things that are going to are going to work. And you know, this question is real for me right now. We started off in the network with, you know, a handful of churches, 5 churches. We're now kind of over 40 churches. And I did everything. I was employed 3 days a week when we first started, and I did everything because there was no one else. Now we've got people like you on the team, and I'm learning that I need to lead through others who are much better than me at doing these things. And so I have to unplug some things I had been doing and give them to people who can do them a lot better than me. What would you say? For you in church right now, what do you need to unplug?
I think it's a good question. I think if we're always saying yes, then we're also saying no.
That's good.
Because if you say yes to everything, you're saying no to some of the things. And the problem is, if you're always saying yes, you're going to be saying no to some of the right things and the better things, and that's the problem. And I think, and again, this is not a one-off, decisional or situation. It's a process, and it depends on your situation, depends on who you've got around you. But I think, just again, like with everything, just begin. You know, just say, hey, I don't need to do that. There's other people that can do it better, and just begin. You know, and I think there'll be a little bit of a withdrawal issue maybe, because you actually like doing that, or it gives you a buzz or a feeling of duty or obligation. But when you see someone else do it and thrive in it and do it better than you, actually that's the best buzz there is.
Absolutely. That's
when somebody else is thriving in it and you think they're doing it way better than I ever could anyway. You know, so I think that's good.
You know that biblical example, you know, Acts chapter 6, when they come to the leaders and they say, there's widows here who are not getting fed. You know, someone needs to do something about this. And they're being overlooked in the food distribution, you know. And it's not right to neglect those. They were being neglected, and it's not right. It has to be done. It's a job that has to be done. We can't ignore the fact that these people are going hungry. And so what they did is they got deacons, if you like. They got another group of people who were practically involved in distributing that food, and they said, we're going to look at prayer and ministry of the word. You guys can do that practical stuff there. And they chose the people to do it. They set the system up to do it. And I wrote it down here because Acts chapter 6 verse 5 says this proposal pleased the whole group. And the result, the word of God spread, and the number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly. The less they did, the more they accomplished.
So true. And I think this does go back, again, the genius of Andy's questions are that they all interconnect. This goes back to me to the who's sitting at your table. Because actually, if you've got the right people around the table, they'll come up with some solutions and some ideas that can help you to unplug that TV. Whereas if you're just looking at it yourself, you think, if I unplug that, how's it going to happen? And I know for me, I don't know the answer to that. You know, because I'm not the smartest person in the room, but actually to get other people around the table who can bring an answer to that, that's going to help me unplug that TV. Help me to stop doing that so that others can do it. And so then, like you say, that it increases and grows. It's amazing.
So back to the start. And he said, when it comes to being a great leader, the questions you ask are more important than the answers you give.
Yeah.
How do you think you and me, in our frail dotage as leaders, how can we go on and be leaders who ask more questions than point fingers and make more stuff?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not learning, you're not leading. That's always been a maxim for me. So I've got to make sure that I'm learning, because if I'm not learning and growing, then I'm not leading effectively, and I think that's important. So if you, going back to Jim Collins on the plugging into, I'm a reader. The last couple of years, I've noticed that my reading has dropped as my Netflix consumption has increased, and actually I'm adjusting that. So that I'm going, because I thought actually there's a correlation between the amount I read and the amount I'm learning, and you can easily stagnate when you've been doing it a long time as well. So I think you've got to keep learning, and then you've got to keep releasing. You've just got to keep learning, keep growing, and keep releasing out as much as you can. I think it's really important.
All of us, whether we're Jesus followers or leaders, or both kind of thing. I think all of us can lean into that idea of powerful leadership comes out of question answering, not always giving. That's right. Question asking, not always giving the answer.
That's right. Yeah,
mate, it's been a joy. Really appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.